All right, hey, Honors Chemistry. I wanted to provide video notes of what we discussed in class about gases and pressure so we could all recap this as a review, or if anybody's missed it, you could easily catch up on these notes. So, to remind you, we talked about pressure as being the force of collisions or pushing of particles with each other and the walls of the container. And so we talked about in class that we could feel pressure, or we feel this pressure is this pushing. And the force of the push is what actually is pressure. And so we added that to our model of matter so far now. And so now every time we show movement, we can show particles colliding with each other and the walls of the container. Okay? That is pressure. And then air pressure is molecules in air exerting pressure, or molecules pushing down on us. And we call that atmospheric pressure. And this is why things don't float. Why things don't float in air. We have air particles pushing them down. And of course, we push back up a bit. But if pressures were different, they'd be floating. All right, so pressure has to do with the collision and pushing of particles. Now, there are certain units for pressure that we could use, and I wanted to spend some time on how we could convert those units. So I'm going to move this down a bit. There are different units. We have the millimeter of mercury, we have the atmosphere, we have the inches of mercury, and the psi and the torr. Psi is pounds per square inch, and that's what's used in tires, kind of an American unit. And we have some conversions here. 1 atmosphere is 760 millimeters of mercury, same thing. 29.9 inches of mercury is 1 atmosphere. 14.7 pounds per square inch is 1 atmosphere, and 760 torr is 1 atmosphere. You do not have to memorize these conversions, but if I give you these conversions, you could use them to convert one measurement to another. So let's look at this example. 950 millimeters of mercury to atmospheres. All right, so remember dimensional analysis. I start with writing with what I have. 950 millimeters of mercury. And I want atmospheres. Are there any direct measurements between millimeters of mercury and atmospheres? Yes, this first one. Okay, so I have a direct conversion. There's something that tells me how to go from millimeters of mercury to atmosphere. So I just need one factor / one step. So I start by writing this. And then for dimensional analysis, the units that we start with goes on the bottom. Millimeters of mercury. And then we want atmospheres in the end. So I'm going to put atmospheres over here. And the unit that we want is atmospheres, so we put that on top. What we want goes on top. What we have goes on the bottom. And now which of these fractions, because I put both of them there, which of these fractions am I going to use that has millimeters of mercury on the bottom and atmospheres on top? Well, we know to use this one. I have 1 atmosphere and 760 millimeters of mercury goes on the bottom. And so now if I go and do this math, the way that I do this is I do 950 times 1. I do it anyways, 950 times 1, and then divide by 760. And that equals 1.25 atmospheres. Done. Okay? Now the next one, you'll see that there's not a direct conversion, but it wants to go from psi to millimeters of mercury. Well, there are no direct conversions that say psi to atmosphere. Remember, these are conversion factors, so they're written as fractions. So I have 14.7 psi is 1 atmosphere. For millimeters of mercury, I know 1 atmosphere is 760 millimeters of mercury. I'll probably have to do 2 steps. There are no direct conversion. So I'm going to need 2 steps. So I'm going to start with what I have, which is 14.7 psi. And so if I start with psi is going to go on the bottom. And I know I need 2 steps because I don't have a direct conversion. Now, the only factor that I have up here that has psi is this one. 14.7 psi is 1 atmosphere. So, since it has psi in the bottom, I'm going to find the one that has psi in the bottom, which is this fraction, and I'm going to put 14.7 psi, 1 atmosphere. Again, I know to use this because this is the only conversion factor I have with psi, so I got no choice to use it. Now let's put atmospheres on top. So if I have a unit on top, then the next factor goes in the bottom. And I know I eventually want millimeters of mercury. That's going to be my final answer, units. And so I need something that goes from atmospheres to millimeters of mercury. And we already got that one. That's over here. Now this time I got to figure out where's the 760 going. Well, I have millimeters of mercury on top and atmospheres on the bottom. So that's this top one. 760 millimeters of mercury, 1 atmosphere. So if I do this math, I'll do 14.7 times 1 divided by 14.7, which you don't need a calculator to do that. That's 1. And then I'll have 1 times 760 divided by 1. I should get 760 millimeters of mercury. A note, you do not have to do dimensional analysis if you are trying to convert between factors, but if you don't know how to do it any other way, use dimensional analysis. So for example, another way to do this first question is you could set up proportions to get the same answer. Right, so this is just another way if you don't want to use dimensional analysis. From math class or other classes, you may have learned that if you want to set up a proportion, okay, I have 950 millimeters of mercury, and I want X atmospheres. Well, I need to set up a proportion that has millimeters of mercury and atmospheres, and that's the atmospheres and 760. So I put equals 760 over 1. And now, if you set up a proportion and you want to solve for X, basically you are cross-multiplying and dividing. You'll have 950 times 1 equals 760 times X, and then you could solve for X and get the same answer of 1.25 atmospheres. That is just another way of doing this. You could do proportions. Also, if you want, you could memorize that to go from millimeters of mercury to atmospheres, you take your millimeters of mercury, you divide by 760, and that's going to be equal to atmospheres. That's just another way of doing things. So I could have just did 950 divided by 760, and that's equal to 1.25 atmospheres. Okay? So this is going to be part 1 of these video notes, so I just wanted to end on converting units. You are going to have to convert between pressure units, especially if or when, or if you already did go to worksheet number 2. You could easily use dimensional analysis, or you could use the proportion method, or you could just know how to divide by certain things. I'm going to leave that up to you, but you have this video and older videos on how to use dimensional analysis. Alrighty, be on the lookout for my next video for the other parts of these notes.